My guest today is Rachel Earing. So welcome, Rachel.
Hi, Tania. Lovely to be with you.
Yeah, I think people who are listening in on this call will not realise that we've just been through an absolute fit of giggles here, for no apparent reason, actually.
I'm just containing myself, just.
Yeah, but you know that there's far worse things in life than the fit of the giggles.
Oh, absolutely. It's done us the power of good, I think.
Yeah, it was quite, I feel quite refreshed after that.
Good.
You know, now Rachel is a mental health energy specialist. I hope I got it right, but I probably feel I didn't quite hit the words right. Mental health energy therapist. Look, professional now.
We are.
Yes. All right then. With that being said, Rachel,
Um,
Rachel is actually a very accomplished therapist who's worked with many, many, many people over time, and she's even developed her own approaches. Rachel is also a mindfulness-based inner repatterning therapist, and why I've invited her on the call today is so that she can discuss some of the work that she's done with mindfulness-based inner repatterning. So welcome, Rachel, again.
It's so lovely to be with you, Tania. It really is. I think we've had a lovely, lovely time before the call, and now it's even more beautiful to be on with you. So thank you.
Thank you. I do think, you know, in life it's important to be able to type of laugh and have a bit of humour about the little things, isn't it, really?
Oh, it is, and I must say that's exactly how my whole therapy approach goes. Anyway, there's an awful lot of laughter in the therapies that I do, and a lot of joy, and a lot of love. So it seemed quite fitting that we should have a fit of the giggles really before we start.
Yeah, just one of those things in life, isn't it? But you know, why cut short a happy moment with that? But thank you, Rachel, again. And maybe, you know, you've used inner repatterning, mindfulness-based inner repatterning. Maybe you could tell us about some of the benefits you found using that approach.
It's extremely gentle and extremely forgiving for people, for in the extent of they don't have to unburden and go back and disclose great personal details, because it works on that real essence of colour and just presence and real connection within yourself. That is so powerful that when somebody who is really quite deeply distressed can tune into that so easily, and it calms the whole system down very, very quickly, but it releases in a most beautiful way. So it helps people feel safe. And I think that's the main thing in any therapy that we do, that somebody who comes to you feels safe. Safe enough to, when they are ready, they can start to disclose. And if they don't need to, then they also don't need to. It's their choice at the end of the day.
Yeah, you make a really, really important point here, because in mindfulness-based inner repatterning, one of the first things we do is establish what we call a safe place, safe zone, and we take them out of that fight or flight response. And I think that's very key. Don't you, in your experience, don't you find that's very important?
Absolutely, because the people that tend to excuse me, that tend to come to me are usually have suffered quite a lot of trauma, the traumatic backgrounds. So for them to have to come and disclose any of that feels traumatic. Just turning up to be online or face to face is such a big thing for them to actually get to being with a therapist. That's enough for them, especially in one session. So it's really important that we're able to put them in that safe place and know that and it gives them the skill as well, actually, for when they leave you, to know that it's something they can put themselves back into that safe space, so that when these things do reoccur, they can do this in a really gentle, beautiful way that's not putting them directly into the event, but it's actually helping them replace it with something else that's more loving and beautiful and kind.
Yeah, I just think it's so, I just adjust the camera slightly here. Yeah, that's my skills away for today. But yeah, no, you put that very, very beautifully, because some people, it takes a lot of bravery to go and see a therapist, I think, especially if you've had a lot of trauma in your life, because you watch any TV show, you will always see that person go see the therapist, and then they start to say things, divulge things that have happened. It's highly traumatic.
It is.
Indeed.
It really is for people, and I think that's the main thing that stops people from going to see anybody. The thought of actually having to go back there, of being put back into that situation, of any of those emotions, those feelings coming back up to the surface, they are usually so powerful, so intense, that to go back to the negative ones that permeate all that through the whole of the system, and it's an experience. It's not even something that they can verbally disclose, because it's very hard to verbalize those physical sensations that are going on and make sense of it, because a lot of trauma, there is no sense. It's a sensory experience. There are things that you see and hear and feel and touch, and when that's all happening in such a short space of time, your energy system sort of closes down to protect you against all of that, and it freezes in your system, or you want to run away from it, whichever one that is. But once that freezes in your system, very much like a vaccine, your whole body learns, and system learns to protect you from those going there again. So it'll try anything to protect you, your energy system. And this is a really gentle approach of sort of creeping in around the edges and getting to the depth of it, and expanding it in a beautiful way, so that it's really just pushing it out from your system and leaving you with a real inner peace.
Yeah, bringing you into inner peace, into coherence and stillness within. And I think, for me, I mean, people think that they need to understand what's happened to themselves and they need to talk it through, but you don't actually need those two things to happen, do you really, in order to clear it?
So I think sometimes you do, and I think sometimes with any therapist that you're working with, that generally happens as you're working through that process with the therapist, because we are there to sort of help that process of understanding, so it does make sense. Otherwise, there's another sort of worry that can start all over again, isn't there? But it does take away very much the edges of when you really don't want to go there, you don't really want to go back into it. But you do need to touch on the fact that it happened. You do need to acknowledge that it happened, and make some peace with that, because it doesn't go away. It just sits in your system, creating either a physical or mental problem that grows and grows and grows until it is dealt with. So it is in a way easier to deal with something as soon as possible when it's happening, because otherwise when it manifests at a later date, it's very hard for somebody who isn't a therapist to locate that back to the initial problem.
Yeah, but thank you for that as well. What I'd say is, in my experience, people often get the realization and understanding as they're working on it. They don't actually need to analyze it prior to. It's as you begin to work on it, often great understanding comes. And I think that's the better way for it to unfold, rather than to try and understand your issue before looking to begin to clear it, and I think, because I've certainly come across, like you said just there, that there comes an understanding as you begin to work on it, and it is keeping that safe place as all that begins to happen, and a shift of how you think about things as well, isn't it? It's about accepting what's happened, because we can't change history. We cannot change the fact that things have happened to us, and we don't really need to either. It's about coming to a place of peace, as you mentioned then with what you said.
And I think that's the really important thing, because we strive so hard to constantly move on and move through and do better and create more and be that better person that we just know inside us that we're meant to be something more than we usually are when we're stuck in that rut. But don't know how to break free from those old patterns, whether that be because of what we're eating, because of the things that we're saying, because of the relationships that we're in, because of the work issues that keep repeating those patterns. And we're not stupid. We're really, none of us are stupid. We know what we should be doing. But because our energy system protects us, there is usually 99.9% of the time an emotional issue there that needs to be acknowledged, that needs to be accepted, that the past did happen with that particular emotion attached to it. And the sooner we can just sort of do that in quite a detached way and say, that happened, I accept that happened, even though I didn't like it, even though it was painful, even though I didn't want it to, it happened. That acceptance in itself with the process of MBIR is so powerful. It releases, and your whole system then starts to soften to go with that. That release is extremely powerful.
Yeah, I think the process I see is just putting us into a natural reboot. Just supporting the body's own natural healing mechanisms, because the body knows what's right for itself. And I think it's just a technique that works in alignment. So do you have any cases that you've done that you have permission to share here, Rachel?
Yes. Excuse me. There is it's actually a YouTube video as well that I've done with the person, so that people can refer to if they want to. But there was a couple that came to see me, and he was very much caught up in the system of being in hospital and intensive care, which is very, especially with COVID at the moment, how it's been, and the fear of people being in that environment, and the fear of dying.
Oh yes.
So we used a lot of the MBIR principles to go through that whole process, and it really shifted things enormously for him, because one of the biggest things that was most difficult, because he very nearly didn't make it, was that light, that bright light that was in intensive care, that bright light that was in the car park as they turned up. Excuse me, there was a lot of connections with this bright light. And as you sort of were able to work through that and change the colours and work through all of that with him in a very sensory way, it changed from, it's as if you think of the magnetic poles, and you've literally got that negative pole of emotion, and it just lifted and shifted completely into the opposite extreme of whatever that negative emotion was. It went to the positive, and you could just see that happening as he was working through it, and how emotional in the most beautiful way he was when that happened, and the realizations as it was all happening, as he was working it out in his system. It really is the most beautiful, powerful, but empowering. And I think that's the key. It's a really empowering therapy, because I'm not doing that for him or her. That's happening within them. And whatever thoughts and colours and shapes and people and events that come to their mind, that's happening as they're putting their own pieces of their life story and their jigsaw together. And that's really how it works, as far as I'm concerned. It's not us imposing anything. It's the client putting their whole life story together in these little jigsaw puzzles, as it shifts from the negative into peace and joy and unconditional love. So very, very powerful.
Yeah, I got the feeling with them emotions. Was it some very beautiful emotions that came up for him?
Oh yeah, and quite funny as well, really, because sometimes the images and the things that you see when you're in this really beautiful, relaxed state don't make complete sense to you at the time, but then as we talk things through afterwards as to what that actually might mean, and I asked certain questions, there was a real rebirthing, literally, of somebody being in that bed, to then what that might actually represent as their new them, as that new person that they then came out of. It was like a total rebirthing process that literally came out as a fried egg. Which, you know, wouldn't make sense until you actually think of, actually, well, an egg is a birth, isn't it? An egg is a birth of something, a rebirthing, a recreation of something else. And
Symbiology. I
that
don't think I got the word right, but it's a symbolism.
That's right. And it was so powerful for him that yeah, and powerful for me as well, because I think each client that you work with, they bring something back to you that you learn from, which is so beautiful. That from a therapist point of view, it is a most beautiful way to work. You never feel drained, you never feel exhausted or it being too much. You actually feel energized, because that sharing of energy between you and the empowerment of somebody, giving that empowerment to somebody else, naturally lifts you and you're learning as well. So it's really, it's powerful.
I would say, one of the beautiful things, I mean, I'm just getting this real true sense of that moment when he was having these shifts with you. You know, I've experienced that so many times myself. A beautiful, it's kind of overwhelming. I find it quite an overwhelming, fantastic feeling.
And it's very emotional. It's very emotional for that person, because they've gone from literally complete and utter terror of death, of everything that connects it to them and their life experience, to becoming something else completely. And that process is just priceless, and it becomes whatever it becomes for that individual, and their beliefs and their lifestyle and whatever it is, but it means the world to that person.
How did it help him in that specific situation he was in then? What was the benefit? What did it do for him?
Oh, complete. I mean, you know, it completely changed his life. He did come to me and say he wanted to get back to normal, and I said, you will never go back to what your normal was. It will have changed. So I always make that very clear, that people will never go back to being as they were, because how they were and what they've gone through will have changed their perspective on it. But he is now obviously much calmer. He's able to go back to work and work, because it was affecting work, it was affecting social life, it was affecting family life. Anxiety, stress, panic attacks. Very sociable person that didn't want to be sociable, wasn't able to connect fully, because everything was too much. All of the sensations, the noise, the sounds, the lights, the people, it was all too claustrophobic. It was claustrophobic. It was too much. And within weeks, he was able, a couple of sessions, he was back out on the dance floor at a wedding, and you know, he was sleeping better. He only sort of needed to actually put his hand on his, on his own heart. He said, I'm off. So it's just literally like, I put my hand there and I've gone. So yes, really beautiful healing ways that gives that person that empowerment to use the tools themselves when they need to at home as well.
Yeah, because the technique is so easy that people can easily be taught to use that, isn't it, really?
Yes, yeah. And once they've had a couple of sessions, they pick it up themselves. And because they come in as a couple as well, it was helping his wife understand his issues. It was also clearing out his wife's trauma from his event, but also trauma from another family grief situation. And they were able as a couple to use it together at home, and it's brought them together as a couple closer. So yeah, very, very powerful.
Well, yeah, that's an absolutely powerful story. So what other benefits have you found from this approach? There's obviously, you were saying, I picked up from that about the benefit of when you're, as the therapist, working with someone, that you find a benefit for you personally,
Yes.
Use.
Yeah, because I don't just do MBIR, I do NLP and hypnosis and Reiki and tapping, EFT. So it allows you to bring that into a therapy session and use that, whether that be at the start of a session. I use MBIR to make, depending on what the client is coming with, so that they feel safe, and then incorporate it into the other therapies as we go through, depending on what the client needs. But I usually always end with MBIR, because it's a really beautiful place to sort of end a session on, making sure that the client is feeling safe and at peace, and leaving you calm and having that reassurance that they're okay before they leave you, no matter what has gone on. Because everybody's got their own layers that they're ready to release each time. Some people are more open to it than others, and they come to you and it might only take one session, and others will, you've got to be gentle and take it at their pace.
I think that's so important. I mean, that this will have been ingrained in you as well as me, isn't it, with your background in all these techniques. You know, it's respecting the person's what's right for them, and respecting that their system knows what's right for them. You know, that's why very much so I like to use or develop techniques that is so respectful of their own deeper knowledge, their, you know, that knowledge that lies within them. And work in alignment with that is just, to me, that's very important. And I get the feeling it's also very important to you as well.
Oh, deeply, deeply, because, you know, trauma, I think it's also very important from any therapist's point of view that you've also done the work on yourself, because if you understand what it means to go through a trauma of your own, and then have worked through it using these techniques, you have a better understanding of what your client is going through, what they're feeling, experiencing, and what it's like at the other end, and that joy and that bliss and how beautiful it is. So it allows you to leave them in that state for as long as they want to be in that state, and then they'll come back into the room when they are ready, rather than you be pushing that, because some people will need that longer than others. And it also gives you the flexibility that when you know somebody is highly traumatized, that I might only use MBIR throughout the whole session with very little talking. They will not mention any detail at all about what has happened to them. It'll just be, what was that emotion? Where does it feel? And literally we're working on complete sensory things to take them away from the event as much as possible, but let them release it and acknowledge that this all happened in the most beautiful way possible for them, rather than the most logical, difficult way that a therapist might understand and explain to them why this is happening. When actually, as a therapist, I don't need to know, only they do.
That's the truth of that, isn't it? And the moment you kick up your conscious, you know, the kind of analytical mind, it's almost like it can stop the releasing, stop the letting go. It's almost like you kind of need to put that mind just to the side to get into that healthy place where your body can reboot itself, refresh its systems in a very beautiful way. But so thank you very much for going through that with us, Rachel. I'm sure you could have told us so many other things, but if people want...
Oh gosh, yes.
For another time then. So if people wanted to find you and find out more about the work that you do, where would they go, Rachel?
You can find me on my website, which is www.live4energy. So that's LIVE, the number 4, energy.co.uk. You can find me on Facebook, you can find me on Instagram, and you can find me on LinkedIn. I am more prevalent on Facebook, I think, than any of the others. So, or you can just get in touch via email too.
All right. Well, I might even get very techie on you and stick that in letters across the bottom of this video.
Oh, I'm impressed.
Well, no, I've been able to do that for a while, but
it's implementing everything, isn't it?
Well, it makes it simpler, doesn't it? But it was an absolute pleasure having this lovely chat. I just have to say, I love your room and your decor there.
Oh, thank you.
It's making me have plain wall envy.
Oh no, honestly, if you saw the other side of the room where we have had a leak with the roof and we've had to, we've got some plaster off the wall, you wouldn't be quite as envious right now, but we're waiting to get that all sorted.
But do you need some therapy there, Rachel?
No, I'm quite okay with it.
With that, I will say thank you very much for being my guest. It's an absolute pleasure.
It's a pleasure. Love you loads. Thank you very much.
Thank you, absolutely.